Hi, this is Peter Schweitzer, and welcome to the Drill Down. Well, the size and scope of the federal budget hangs in the balance, and we're going to talk about one of the key players in that drama, Congressman Chip Roy from Texas. The co-host of this program, of course, is Eric Eggers. Eric, how are you?
I'm okay. I'm excited to talk about things that might be big. It's debatable about how beautiful they are, but we know that we have some serious problems, and Congressman Roy has been, I think, among the leaders in articulating the severity of those problems. So we're excited to talk to him about what this bill does, and does it make it better or worse?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, Congressman Chip Roy, of course, represents the district in the state of Texas. He's a member of the House Budget Committee. Congressman, let's dive in and talk about where we are in the process. You were somebody who received a lot of attention, and I think for good reasons, in terms of when this budget was being formulated. You ended up voting for it, knowing that it was going to be kicked to the Senate. Are you happy with what the senators are doing, like Ron Johnson and others, in raising these issues? And where do you think we're going to end up in terms of the final budget?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, look, first of all, I appreciate being on the show, and it's such an important topic at the moment because we've got to figure out right now whether we're going to be serious at this moment in time to meet the moment. And people have kind of been talking to me about, well, do you support the bill or not? And I put out my statement, I don't really think the bill yet meets the moment. And that's actually what I think. There are a lot of good things in it, and I voted for it to be a part of the team and try to work with the president to try to deliver. We've got historic levels of reductions in Medicaid, upwards of $1 trillion when you look at the total. We got a true full repeal of future projects with respect to the Green New Scam. We made a lot of reforms on that. We got the Medicaid work requirements that I talked about. A lot of things that I think are very good that will put us on a better path. But is it enough? I've got concerns that the bill still has significant amount of deficits in years 26, 7, 8, 9, and then finally in 30, they start to be deficit reducing. I don't think that's fast enough. I think we need to get deficits down. And, these are the things that I hope the Senate is going to work to continue to improve. But at the end of the day, we moved the ball down the field trying to work with the president to make sure that we're going to have tax cut policies, the things that we need for economic growth, along with some of these really meaningful changes like the Inflation Reduction Act, Green New Scam, and Medicaid improvements. But I hope the Senate can make it even better because it's kind of right on the edge right now as to whether I think it's where it needs to be.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We need to have the tax cuts. My question for you is, and I say this as a guy who's incredibly hawkish, I love and want a strong military, but is it realistic when we are running the national debt and we're running these annual deficits to increase defense spending by 13% in the context of all the other budgetary issues we're dealing with?
So I'll tell you what's going on with the defense spending. We did something we've never done before, working a direct connection with the White House and the Office of Management and Budget Director, Russ Vought. We put $150 billion of funds into this mandatory reconciliation bill so that we could get money directly to Hegseth, the president, and the whole team to do what needs to be done to rebuild, modernize the military, look at the Iron Dome / Golden Dome, look at upgrading our missiles. Right now, our Navy's not where it needs to be. We need to get it modernized and quickly. But you're right. We've been racking up so much debt. We're spending $1 trillion a year in interest that we've got to do something about our fiscal situation. So why we did the defense money there was because we've got to go fight the discretionary appropriations battle later this year and this fall. So every year we have this fight where the defense hawks say we need defense spending, and the Democrats and the big spender Republicans say we need non-defense spending, and they just keep bidding it all up. We're trying to break that process, put a pot of money over here in defense. Then we go over here, hold defense flat in appropriations, hold non-defense flat, and maybe even cut it. Remember, the White House sent up a budget that cuts non-defense by $160 billion. So we're trying to break this normal game that's played, and we'll see if we can do it. Look, we've got so many moving parts we've got to do. That's part of it. But to answer your question, the Pentagon's got to go find the waste. We've told Pete Hegseth, look, you got to go find the cuts and use that money for troop pay and for assets. Go cut all the DEI, go cut all the redundancy, go cut all the top brass. You've got way too many brass. And then find those savings to modernize the military. So it's a process, and we're trying to work with the president and Pete and Russ to do that.
So to that point, Pete Hegseth put out a video, I think a couple weeks ago, and said he was signing something that meant $5-something billion in reductions based on some of the DOGE identified, aspects of waste, fraud, and abuse. Is that real? I mean, how real is the stuff that we heard? You're on the House Budget Committee. So what's the connection between something that they said they've done and actual money being saved?
So we're getting updates as we speak through the DOGE subcommittee on the Oversight Committee, and then from the White House and OMB. They're just now wrapping their arms around all of the things that Elon's team worked to do through DOGE to identify the waste, fraud, and abuse. Now, you remember that Elon came in and they were talking about $2 trillion and then $1 trillion. Then that became about $170 billion. So we're looking to see what they've done. Look, there's some real things in there. Eliminating software licenses for computers that don't exist, shutting down real estate and buildings that were sitting there empty and ending those, ending long-term contracts, grants that they're cutting back. There's like $50 billion of grants across the government. That money that Pete, I think what they identified at the Pentagon, there's a lot of waste there, and I do think it's real. But we haven't yet got the reports for us to go through and look and see what that looks like. And it's one of the things that I'm demanding and asking for is saying, look, we need to be able to see the exact numbers. Because as important as DOGE is, and it is, and as much as we should codify the things that their team did, and we should, we also need to be mindful of the magnitude of the spending we're talking about. We want to get rid of that waste, but the stuff that the administration is doing in precisions and executive orders, the stuff that we're doing to hold the appropriations budget flat if we can, that's the current plan, and what we're doing over here in reconciliation, which we should go further, that's where the real money is, right? Trillions of dollars. So we've got to do it all. That's a step in the right direction, identifying that waste. But Congress, it's funny, last point I'll make, Elon came and addressed us in December, and I got into some trouble and some news got out because I looked at those guys and I said, you're going to find a lot of waste. Your problem's not going to be finding it. Your problem's right here in the room. It's my colleagues. It's Congress, because we keep spending money and we are addicted to spending money. So that's going to be your real problem with DOGE.
To the point, your office actually, so it's a national show, but we want to help you out with a local constituent services issue. Your office yesterday put out a press release where you talked about the spread of the New World screwworm. Yeah. And you said that, this is terrifying. It's a parasite that eats animals alive, and it's going to cost, to your point, $1.8 billion in damage to the state's economy. And I thought, what a perfect metaphor for congressional spending. Screwworm. And I mean, if this parasite is eating the animals, congressional spending is eating our budget. You said it's $1 trillion in what we spend just to service the debt. And so this bill adds $320 billion in new spending. And you're one of the toughest guys out there on this, right? You have fought for speaker battles. You've held up relief packages. So you're the guy, and you're still a yes, a reluctant yes, but you're a yes. So tell us, what does it look like for them to pressure you to get there? Or is it, because your district hasn't voted for a Democrat since 1976, so you're in a safe seat. So, so just talk us through, what actually happens? What are those conversations like, and how do you get there when everything else you say is this is not good? So I could do a 2-hour conversation on this. I'll give you my 2-minute version, which is this. Since I've been here, I've been pretty clear about what I think. We have got to get to something resembling balanced budgets. We've got to cut spending. We cannot continue to do this. We're $36 trillion in debt, $1 trillion of interest every year. We're bankrupting the country. The bond markets are on a knife's edge. And we know that. Everybody knows that. But the problem is, Ronald Reagan famously said to, I think it was Johnny Carson, a late night show, he said, look, every proposal a member of Congress puts forward should come with a tax increase attached to it. Because Congress critters go in there and they put together a program. It sounds good. It's for cancer victims. I'm a cancer survivor. It's for ALS, or it's for some program. It's to solve a problem. And then they vote for it without regard to whether we have the money to pay for it. So now back to your question. What's the pressure like? Well, I don't care. I'm going to do what I think is right. And I've done that as much as, I think I've been pretty clear about that. And I take the arrows for doing it. But we have to deliver. And the president of the United States was given a mandate. The president of the United States wants to make sure that we've got tax policy in place for economic growth. He's got a good team in place like Scott Besson over at Treasury, Russ Vought at OMB. He's got a cabinet, and they're serious, and they're constraining spending. They're cutting back regulations. And this is all important for the country. Congress, we're not doing as much as I'd prefer, but we have a 3, 4, 5 seat majority in the House, a 3-seat majority in the Senate. And we are doing a lot of good things. We passed the SAVE Act to try to preserve our elections. We've passed some other good bills. Now we're passing a reconciliation package that I had to hold my nose. Yes,
It doesn't cut as much as I would prefer. But what we got in the IRA, I just want you to consider. The president said terminate the Green New Scam. We are subsidizing unreliable energy, which undermines our markets, fuels the Chinese, and stops natural gas and nuclear plants from being built because you're subsidizing wind and solar, which is unreliable. We can't do that. So we got in there and fought it out. Remember, I voted against the bill in the budget committee. I stopped the whole process for a week with 3 colleagues. And then we negotiated for a week, and we got a resolution to that, which constrained those new projects. That's a big deal. It's like $600 billion of subsidies that will no longer go out the door. So if the Senate retains that, that's a big win. The Medicaid work requirements, big win. The food stamp work requirements, big win. Silencers off of the National Firearms Registry and all this stuff. These are all really important things that we're able to get. Is it everything I want? Hell no. Did I get what I want of Medicaid reform with the FMAP and provider taxes, which is nerd speak for trying to make sure we equate, making sure non-expansion states don't have pressure to expand and make sure the vulnerable are cared for instead of the able-bodied? No, I didn't get everything I wanted. I hope the Senate fights for more, but I got to work with the president and work with the team. I don't feel any pressure like, oh my God, you're going to get taken out. I feel pressure for my country and my kids. Sometimes you got to 3 yards in a cloud of dust to move the ball down the field. That's what we're doing.
Well, Congressman, one of the issues that you've raised, and I think a lot of people are frustrated about, is the numbers. There's so many funny numbers that are put out on these budget proposals on what the budget's going to be, how much money is being spent. There's a debate going on right now about how big the deficit's going to be. No, we're going to have a growth rate of 4%. I sure hope we have a growth rate of 4%. And if we have a growth rate of 4%, the debt's going to be much lower than it would be otherwise. How confident are you in the numbers? I mean, I think Russ Vought does a great job. I know him a little bit. I think he's trying to clear that stuff up. But again, there are so many political advantages to be gained by effectively cooking the books. How confident are you on these projections, even if we get a lot of what we want, that these numbers are actually going to actually represent what the state of the debt is?
So this is actually, I think, a fundamentally core question to what we're dealing with right now. And you've raised the right one. When we were going into this process, remember that the Congressional Budget Office, which scores this stuff, they only assume 1.8% of growth, and they don't really put in place a dynamic score impact for tax cuts and regulatory policy. Now, I disagree with that. I think there is a dynamic impact. We all do as conservatives, right? We believe in low taxes, low regulations, grow the economy. That increases the pie. You get revenue out of that. But the difference that we actually created this year, my friend Jody Arrington, the chairman of the budget committee, myself, some other budget hawks, we forced the question on Republicans to say, guys, we're all for tax cuts. And no, we don't always accept that you got to pay for tax cuts. It's the people's money. But you do have to do basic math. And you got to look at the tax cuts versus what's going to happen with revenue and make sure the spending cuts are aligned with the tax cuts. So that's what we did this year that was different. We created a model that said, guys, you have to deliver the spending cuts with the tax cuts. So we did that. Not quite to the level that I preferred, but we got a fairly significant number of spending reductions, plus the repeal of the Inflation Reduction Act, which got you a significant amount of match to the tax cuts. So now let's get to the growth question. The CBO assumed 1.8% growth. We in the budget committee assumed 2.6% growth. That is the midpoint between the CBO's conservative projection and the 3.2% historic rate, or the 3+4% type rate that the president is talking about getting and Scott Bessent would like to achieve. And God knows, like you, God bless, I hope we achieve it. And then we get more revenue in and we can get deficits down further. But I think we needed to get a midpoint that was reasonable and responsible to force the question on spending restraint. And that's why I started this conversation by saying, for my personal pleasure, I don't believe that this is done enough in the first 5 years. In 2026, we will see a $400 billion dynamic deficit. In 2027, it's 300 and something billion. 2028, 29. It's not till 2030 that you start to see the deficit go down so that it's a net benefit to the deficit. So I think we have more work to do. I hope the Senate will go further, but we are trying to find numbers that we believe in. And look, if we get 3.5%, 4% growth, awesome. That's gravy. But I think we need to budget to a reasonable number, not the pathetic 1.8%, but a reasonable number. So we did 2.6%.
Let me ask you something specifically that's in the budget. I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, and that concerns data collection AI, and apparently involves a couple of particular companies, in particular Palantir. This is, I think, an attempt to create a coherent AI policy, but a lot of critics are saying that this is benefiting a couple of companies that are very politically connected, like Palantir, and that it also prevents other states, the state of Florida where we live, for example, from saying, wait a minute, we don't want this data collection taking place. What's your take on that aspect of the bill? And do you know how it got in the bill in the first place?
Yeah, so that one got put in there, and we were observing that was a problem, particularly the part that was restricting states from being able to do what they needed to regulate. I want to give Ron DeSantis in the great state of Florida, just like Abbott in the great state of Texas, the ability to do what's right for their people. We raised a fuss about it, and in the waning hours, they modified it a little bit to say that AI engaged in interstate commerce and blah, 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 to try to tighten it. Tightened it a little, but not really, right? Like all AI is involved in interstate commerce, right? So that's kind of a fake savings. So I'm telling the Senate and my brothers and sisters over there on this, hey, guys, I think you need to fix this. At a bare minimum, like putting aside the Palantir issue or any of the specifics that might benefit a couple of companies, which is always concerning. That's concerning on anything we do. It's why, by the way, why members of Congress shouldn't be trading stocks, but that's a different podcast for a different day. I have the bill to do that, by the way, to ban it. But look, I think we should be careful about that, but states should be able to regulate it. We should fix that and allow states to be able to get involved. I think they wanted to prevent states from messing with this like new growth opportunity nationwide. And I understand that. But at some point, we have a federalist system and it should matter. I'll tell you another thing that we did in this bill that I don't like. This bill also has a new car tax. And I'm not for a car tax, okay? It has a car tax on EVs and on hybrids to offset the fact that they're not doing gas taxes, right? Because their mileage is high or their EVs. So we need to pay for the roads. It's like, okay, but I don't want to have a federal government apply a car tax. A gas tax, at least I go to the pump and I have a choice how much I'm pumping. But I'm a free American. I own a car and I got to pay a car tax to the government. I don't like that either. So there's a number of provisions in the bill that we're still looking at that we've got concerns with. Those are at least two of them, the ones you just mentioned, the AI and the car tax.
It's almost like Elon Musk begrudgingly accepted the car tax as long as he could have no federal regulation or state regulation on AI for the next decade. He's like, he's done the math on this and it checks out. But to that point, I mean, just tell people who are listening who aren't members of Congress, you know this process inside and out. You worked as a chief of staff for Ted Cruz. Yeah. You've been involved in the process for a long time, and now you get to make votes. And you said you're only one of 435. And so that we understand, I'm sure, how frustrating it can be. But like, how does a provision like that specifically, the one that would keep any regulation for AI for 10 years, how does it get in there? What committee does it come from? Who writes it? Who puts it in? I mean, how does this happen?
So, and frankly, I have to think about the committee of jurisdiction that came through. I assume it was Energy and Commerce, but I'd have to go back and look. But what happens is the committee staff put together the product, and this is part of my issue, right? Is like, yeah, we're on committees. I'm on budget, which deals with the entirety of the budget. I'm on Judiciary Committee, which are those issues, and then the Rules Committee. But, if you're on E&C, if you're on the Ways and Means Committee, you do tax policy, or if you're, you have a lot of power over this one particular area, which is really important to everybody. And I'm a member is equally, with an equal election certificate as any other member. So we get these bills and they just say, well, you got to pass them because the committee gave them. Let's all come together and pass them. I'm like, no. Now's our turn to look at them. So that was a part of the negotiations last week. We forced, but again, there's a limit to how much you can do. We forced a fight on constraining the Inflation Reduction Act. The first version of the bill that came out of committee was really weak. It went all the way out to 2031, well into the 2030s, allowing projects to keep getting developed, had no start construction date, didn't limit it nearly enough. We tightened that down a lot. Alex Epstein, who comments on this stuff a lot, has been great about it. And he's like, hey, this is a very good improvement. And we tightened it down. So something like this got put in the committee, probably for some amount of political pressure, and maybe in some good faith, as we already discussed, to say, well, we don't want to interfere with strong economic growth, with AI development in the United States to compete with China and everything else. Usually it's under the excuse of national security or something. But in this case, you got to remember federalism. You got to remember that we don't think there ought to be massive federal laws and restrictions on the ability of the state of Florida or Texas or any other state to be able to step in there and try to stop it. So hopefully we'll have a good, robust debate in the Senate and back and forth before it comes to the House and clean up a few of these issues.
So I'm asking you here a little bit to look into the souls of your colleagues, which is always a perilous question. But honestly, how much do you think members of Congress, particularly in the Republican majority, actually do care about the debt and the deficit? How much of it is just talk? They know that that's part of what you're supposed to say as a Republican. And how much of it do they actually believe that this is an existential threat for America? I know there's been debate about whether Trump really believes that debt is a problem or not. But what's your sense of the center of gravity within the Republican caucus in the House of Representatives?
I would say historically, and I've got a pretty good view on this after the last 3 terms in Congress. And then, as you said, Senator Ted Cruz is chief of staff. I also worked on the Senate Judiciary Committee before that. And so I've been around and seen it. And I would tell you that the center of gravity has moved, that now people are starting to recognize how bad it really is, but they're catching up late. Like, we are way late, right? At $1 trillion of interest, where we are. Look, guys, if we have to refinance our debt at the rates that I know Scott Bessent is fearful that we'll have to refinance our debt, then that $1 trillion interest rate is going to skyrocket. And that is going to become borderline unmanageable, that our interest alone as a percentage of our GDP is going to become unmanageable. And I think members are starting to get that. And here's why I think that. If you would have asked me 6 months ago, when the White House was pretty much saying, don't touch, they already said, do not touch Medicare or Social Security. And we can't by law touch Social Security and reconciliation. They said, don't touch Medicaid. And now we touched Medicaid to the tune of about $900 billion to $1 trillion. There is an understanding, right? That would not have happened 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 6 years ago. Is it an understanding that meets the moment? No. Because if you had an understanding that meets the moment, you wouldn't have had some of my colleagues begging for a SALT tax cap increase so they can, make sure that their high tax jurisdictions in New York are getting subsidized. Or they wouldn't have balked when we were trying to make better reforms to Medicaid that would have saved more money. They wouldn't have balked at limiting the other subsidies still flowing under the Inflation Reduction Act or other things that could have really reduced it to be deficit reducing, even at assumed kind of average growth at 2.6%. But we got pushback on that because they still haven't fully learned the lesson. I always try to remind my colleagues, what would you do if we literally had like a law of like natural law of gravity type, all of a sudden you literally can't spend more than you take in revenue? What would you do? Because that's what we should do. You guys all run on balancing the budget. And yet it was always religion on them to say, we will absolutely never increase taxes. We will only cut taxes. And I'm like, great, I believe in that. However, you also always run on balancing the budget, but yet you keep spending like drunken sailors. And the last point I'll make, you know how many times we've had shutdown fights over the last decade, right? Every year, like we have a big shutdown fight over the roughly 28% of the budget, $1.7 or $8 trillion that's discretionary. And they go, Chip, you're crazy. Why are you fighting over this? This is peanuts. Stop worrying about the peanuts. The real problem, Chip, is all of the mandatory spending. I'm like, okay, guys, well, here we are. And we're talking about it in reconciliation. And we're talking about Medicaid, and we're talking about veteran spending, and we're talking about food stamps. And yet we should be talking about Medicare, but you're too chicken to do it. So what are we going to do about all this mandatory spending? Because now's the moment. And your kids and your grandkids, my grandkids, their futures are all hanging in the balance. So to answer your question, the religion is getting stronger, but they're still kind of like looking at the church from outside. They need to get in the pews and get religion on spending because they ain't there yet.
Well, it normally takes like some sort of a crisis for people to truly find religion, right? So maybe we'll see the slight credit downgrade apparently didn't do it. Last question for me, Congressman Roy, and we appreciate the time and then we appreciate the candor, right? Because I think it's unusual and it's unique for people who listen to this show to get a peek behind the curtain, understand how stuff really works. And so how it works, because we've seen all the stuff about the DOGE, and you said we're kind of waiting to see, and you're just now beginning. There's a $9.4 billion package of rescissions, I think, that's coming this week, maybe next week. What's your understanding or your best guess? I mean, Peter's asking you to look into the souls of people. I'm just asking you to look into like a couple weeks from now. What's your best guess that like the number ends up being based on the stuff that DOGE has done? And how important is it, I guess, to get this first thing done? And do you feel like it'll go well and then we can do more? Or, I mean, just what should we prepare for?
So let me try to do 101 real quick for your listeners, okay? And I don't want to take up too much time. We have the reconciliation process that we're dealing with the mandatory spending. That's the big, beautiful bill. Yep. We have the discretionary budget that's coming up. The president sent up a budget. Russ Vought sent it up, cutting $163 billion from non-defense, defense flat, like I mentioned before. A lot of the DOGE stuff can be found in that $163 billion in cuts. The problem is we're going to hit the Senate with Democrats, and you need to get 60 votes on that bill, because mandatory reconciliation bill, right? That can get done with 51 votes in the Senate. The discretionary piece needs 60 votes in the Senate. So the best we're going to get out of that is something like flat, right? Best case scenario is like a CR, continuing resolution level, like flat. So now enter the other option, rescissions. There are two ways to get rescissions. One is White House sends it up to us. We pass it, goes to the Senate. Again, 51 vote threshold. The White House is going to send us up a package today or tomorrow, $9 billion to hit NPR and PBS. Will Congress do it? It's a test case. Will Congress stand up and do what they're supposed to do? Or are they going to bow in the corner and go, oh, but I like PBS and I like Sesame Street and I like other stuff? Or are they going to do their job? We'll find out. If they fail, well, if we succeed, great. Maybe they'll send another package of rescissions. Maybe we can get 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 billion. I'll tell you, historically, Congress has not done well on rescissions. But we'll see. Maybe we will. The final thing is that the president can do pocket rescissions. They can do rescissions in the last 45 days of the year themselves, unilaterally. So I'm just going to say, from my standpoint, I'm going to do, you cannot send something up here that cuts spending that I won't vote for. Like, just send it up, I'll vote for it. Cut the spending. And so I'm not a problem, but we need to work with the White House to deliver as many reductions as we can. You ask for a number, I don't know. My best case guess is the bill that's going to get through on mandatory rescissions is close to what the House passed. Maybe it gets a little better in the Senate. I'm praying. The bill that we do in the September on appropriations will probably be flat-ish, either a CR or something that appropriates at a flat level for Pentagon and non-defense. And we will do probably a few rescissions, but we'll hit a wall with some of our moderates and members who don't like to cut. And then the president will come in with some impoundment and some executive pocket veto rescissions. And that's good policy too. And we got to just keep getting in the boat and rowing. We got to win the election. And then we got to have a righteous fight in the last 2 years of the president's term to cut the crap out of spending, reform, Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid the right way, provide healthcare freedom for our people, get the debt and deficits down, grow the economy, and get out of this mess.
That's the best fight to have, a righteous fight. And we appreciate Congressman Chip Roy from joining us, a member of the House Budget Committee. A lot of people in D.C. say they fight for things. Chip Roy actually fights for things. So we appreciate you. Thank you very much for joining us. And we appreciate the audience for taking the time to listen. You can find out more about our programs and our research at thedrilldown.com. And you can subscribe to this podcast wherever fine podcasts are located. Thanks again. Until next time.